Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to People Banyan. Our exhibition is to be streamed from Haus der Statistik Berlin. We opened last weekend, Friday last week, and we are actually allowed to open people as of Wednesday last week. We kicked it off last weekend with 2 panels. On Sunday, it was rather male-focused. And today we continue with a more female-focused panel, which I'm very happy about. Amna, maybe you want to say a word or two?
Yeah, and I'm super excited that we have Hajra, Nida, Anam, and Sadia with us, who are 4 amazing and brilliant artists, and I mean, all of different fields, and they're very brave, and I'm super excited to hear about ways of seeing. So over to Hajra to conduct this panel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Amna and Benjamin. It's for this opportunity to speak to these brilliant young women, and for facilitating the panels for today and tomorrow, and really looking forward to getting into a conversation with these women. I'm going to start with a little bit about what we'll be talking about and what the conversation will be about. If you have already seen some of their works, were up online on the website, if you had a chance to see, and you would know that they have a unique way with words and images, and they really make the viewers and the readers reconfigure ways of thinking and seeing. And so what I'll do is now I'm going to briefly introduce each of them, even though their list of accomplishments run deep. So I'll try to capture as much as is possible right now. Anam Abbas is a producer, director, and cinematographer based in Rawalpindi. She fights for a new wave of Pakistani cinema. She shores her country beyond war, terror, and female repression. Abbas uses cinema as a voice that will break through. As a producer and DOP, her first feature film, Showgirls of Pakistan, won the Best Pitch Award at the 2016 Hot Dogs Forum. Berlin Talents Footprints Jury 2020, led by Wim Wenders, awarded Abbas for sustainable change. She runs other memory media in Pakistan and Zan Productions in Canada. She's a founding member of the Documentary Association of Pakistan, which is doing some really brilliant work and making space for upcoming and emerging talent, as well as other existing talents. Abbas is also a Locarno Open Doors 2017 alumni, Berlin Talents 2018 fellow, Film Independent Global Media Makers 2019 fellow, and the American Film Showcase Documentary Development Lab 2019 fellow. So welcome, Anam. Looking forward to getting to know a bit more about how you have been keeping yourself busy. So next I'll introduce Sadia. Sadia Khatri is a writer and journalist based in Karachi. Her growing interest in film writing comes from a place of wanting to dissect gender, sexuality, and class politics in South Asian cinema. Sadia also writes fiction and narrative nonfiction about cities, gender, queerness, sci-fi, and is currently working on her first book about the life of the Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali. In 2015, Sadia also co-founded Girls at Tabas, a feminist collective which seeks to reimagine and archive women and non-binary individual experiences in public spaces through photographs and texts. Sadia's activism has focused on rallying for public spaces as a legitimate site of feminist practices and using storytelling to rewrite the narrative. And then we have Nida, which we have the pleasure of having with us in person today. Nida is a photographer and filmmaker based in Lahore. She's currently artist in residence at the Académie der Kunst Berlin. Her work is based on themes of social injustice ranging from religious persecution to gender discrimination in Pakistan. Her documentary work has earned her places at several international workshops and fellowships, including the Magnum Foundation's Social Justice Program and Berlinale Talents 2020. Her short films have screened at international film festivals, including Locarno Open Doors 2018. And now we are going to get to know a bit about what they have been doing and how they've been keeping busy. And I would really like today, it was a bit tough actually to really narrow down the questions for each of them, because it's like you can speak great lengths about their work, but today what I'll try to do is be a bit more selective and talk about their approach and how they formulate their ideas and stories, and also their process and the experiences within that process. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to, most of these questions that I have are addressed to all three of you, so you're not obliged to answer necessarily, but if you, wherever you join in, because I have a feeling that it's going to be a bit back and forth also with the way the questions are. So one thing that I've noticed in each one of your works is that you refrain from creating linear and didactic narratives, and there's often a subtle challenge for the viewer to think about, to interact and to think and question what they're seeing and to kind of connect the dots. There is this idea, and to share that curiosity. And I was thinking, if you would speak to us a little bit about the importance of non-linear narrative. It's
I'll jump in.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that there is certain kinds of narratives we learn, especially in the documentary world, as being the commercial route to success and to large audiences. Sorry, I'm going to be a bit slow because I can hear myself and it's a bit distracting. I remember the exact moment. For Showgirls of Pakistan, it's a film that follows three women who dance on the Punjabi stage, but it was, and it is in some senses a linear narrative in the three chapters of the film. But at some point, we were trying to interweave, for years actually, we were trying to interweave the stories of these characters, because there was this pressure almost of that's what's expected, that you are expected to have subjects of a documentary comment on each other in order to arise to a conclusion at the end. And it was so forced, and it was just harmful to the world building and the characters and their own separate language. And so, at some point we had to literally decide to not think about the industry or not think about what we're expected to do for a commercial work, because it is, the documentary is an industry, and choose language of the individual world and subjects as the driving force rather than the sort of Hollywoodized, way to tell the story. And I also, I teach this class called Decolonizing Science Fiction Film, and one of the things in my research that I learned was even the linear, again, the Hollywoodized narrative structure of cinema or of literature is about the hero conquering the world or conquering reality. And so it is necessarily an imperialist way of looking at the world. And if you look at, for example, Japanese narrative structures, you're not coming, it's not like the hero is trying to achieve something, there's a obstacle and the hero must overcome it. It is that the person encounters something unexpected and then is able to understand how that unexpected thing actually is in balance with the rest of the universe, which I love. I think it's not an aggressive way to tell a story, and I think that's something that inherently I enjoy as an artist.
Great, thanks, Anam. Like some of those points are actually, I'm going to pick up on them again, later on. But Sadia or Nida, if you would like to maybe add something, or just just how you think about storytelling in itself.
Because I don't know, I'm recent to storytelling, so I just jump into a story because it's important for me. I shoot it, I pick it up bits and pieces. So for me, it's raw material, and then the material kind of informs me how it should be. So for me, it's not like I don't think about the narrative beforehand. I don't think that it's going to be linear or non-linear. It's the raw material that kind of defines how it's going to be for me.
Sadia, would you like to take this up, or?
Can you hear me okay? I'm getting a little stuck.
Yes, we can hear you really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me know if you can't hear me because I'm getting a lag.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's going pretty well for us here. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm just gonna keep talking, and I picked up what Anam and Nida were saying. So I'll just pick it up from Anam's what Anam brought up about the hero, right? And there's this essay by Ursula Le Guin called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, which kind of compares this hero's journey, this masculine hero's journey, to the journey of a feminine hero and the idea of your bag, right? So physical adventure of like climbing a mountain and overcoming a conquest or something like that. But there's also the person who goes out into the fields with a basket, right? And what happens in that basket? You gather food, you encounter things, you bring back pieces of your journey that change you in some way, and that is also a hero's journey. So the way I understand my personal hero figure, and I know what is also a little similar, is the idea of encounter as opposed to conquest or adventure. And when you were reading my bio, you said this is an old bio I used to use where I would write taking back the narrative, but I don't even believe in that anymore. I don't think there's anything to take back. I think what we live and what we make is narrative itself. And in order to find new ways of doing that, we need to break the old rules, right? So get rid of that Hollywood script, or, as Nida was saying, like take your raw materials first and then see out of encounter what comes. And for me, that site of play and encounter is also a site where I feel like I'm getting new knowledge about how do you make a hero's journey? How do you see that differently? So my most recent work is the video SAC, which the process of it was also one of encounter. There was no script. I had footage and I developed the text as the footage was assembled. So, it was very much mimicking that act of encounter, even in the process of making it.
Yeah, fantastic. And
did you guys get that, or was it breaking up?
no, I think it was pretty good. Like we got it. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because this really, I think, and I think before we go any further, I would actually like to address it and perhaps address the elephant in the room, sort of, because and something you also mentioned, Anam, the commercial aspect into documentary filmmaking, or just you know, like the expectations of the Western and the national mainstream, or just, you know, also funding bodies or showing bodies about what should be shown about when you're representing women, especially from Pakistan. Like, they already have something in mind. And I'm just thinking if you could, like, and that has been a challenge, especially, like, Anam, you have spoken about this when you were trying to get funding for Showgirls of Pakistan as well in sponsorship. And also, like, I'm just thinking, like, you know, even in our daily lives and how we live our lives on the ground as well, like, how are these, when fulfilled, because often these expectations are also fulfilled, then how are they detrimental to the lives and the struggles on the ground? And, you know, like, and this is also, like, one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is also to acknowledge and to really you know, set the record straight, how, like, where the starting point where you have to start from, and like, where, like, and how these, like, when your own ideas do not align with these expectations and you want to break these kind of narrative building, and also the implications of these narratives on the, like, and the weight of these portrayals, and how do they make, like, really impact and life in real. So if you could, like, just speak a little bit about that, like, once, like, I'm going to recap quickly, like, the expectations, and then, you know, how you go through that struggle, and how is it detrimental on the ground?
I think to start with the detrimental on the ground, the most clear and present example is that when you know, we're all on social media watching Palestine get pillaged and destroyed. And, you know, some of us just, you know, I think it's hard to escape it on socials anyway. So if you look at comments, and there's, you know, people fighting about who is right and who is in the wrong, and you see many Zionists and liberal Western people, I see this comment again and again underneath these videos of people dying, that these are extremely patriarchal cultures. I think I saw a comment that said this, they would put the Vikings to shame. You know, they're anti-women, they're anti-queer people. Why are you defending them? And so this narrative first allowed the, I don't know, decades-long war in Afghanistan, and, you know, death in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and similarly, it is being used as an excuse to continue to kill us, right? Where our Muslim men, their lives have no value because they're patriarchs. And this has been, in the documentary world, it's been a very clear trend for years. The only change, there was a shift when suddenly there was a lot of, you know, nothing about us without us. I can hear somebody in my ear. Okay, sorry. So now we're in a position where we're really pushing that we tell our own stories, right? And which is a lot of people now getting pissed off because their entire careers were based on coming into our countries and making films about how abject. But then there is the expectation, I think, maybe a generation above me, where they
Please
thought they
continue.
also had to make the same content, right? That was being made. Like, you have to sort of take on the Western gaze yourself as a person, as maybe women think that when they make cinema they have to take on the male gaze. But I think, like, for my career, the solution is to work outside the industry, and that's been the funding. We haven't really gotten any support from the industry, from festivals, yes, but not from people who had the money. So the showreels was funded mostly by private funds, and then eventually, when we found a home at Vice, and even with my new film, I was funded by the Canada Arts Council, and now we're premiering at Sheffield. Sheffield is the head is a brown woman. Vice, the producer who brought us the film, and Surush, they're South Asian, and so eventually, we're able to now move forward because a lot of the gatekeepers and decision makers are us now. That's literally the only difference.
Right.
So you either work outside the industry or you change it.
I completely agree with what she says. She said, because representation of women from our regions, particularly from Pakistan, Afghanistan, has been problematic in the Western world. There are certain expectations, and it comes from decades of exploitative documentation, both in photography and filmmaking. And even the most successful films, documentary films from our region, made by our own people, are very exploitative.
Yeah.
So it tells us that what are the expectations. So it is a problem. But like Anam said, it's very important that we start telling our own stories, and we find our own systems of sponsoring it. Like you work on your long-term personal projects. You earn money from somewhere else and put it on your personal projects.
Yeah.
That's the only way to move forward, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Just wanted to mention a little anecdote. What I read today, I think it was Documentary Magazine published something, or maybe it was a bit older, an article. But there's a case going on where the FBI posed as documentary filmmakers in order to spy on an activist group that was in the U.S. that was working and holding protests against the FBI. And so and that's that just tells you everything you need to know, really.
Right.
About the way documentary structures work.
Yeah. Okay. So just an extension of this question, and now moving on to your work. So we live under social and political surveillance constantly, like living and working within that. Like, I'm just, thinking, like, as practitioners, like, what are the ethical considerations when working with communities? And Nida and Anam, you both have specifically, like, worked with communities, and Sadia, you have interacted with people in your personal experiences as well. And I'm just thinking, like, especially when you're working with marginalized communities, and if you're showing their stories, or if you're talking about them, like, where do you draw the line of, between visibility and opacity? Like, how much do you tell, and what do you refrain from? Like, where do you stop?
For me, it starts right from the conceptualization, because I have to resolve a lot of things when I'm photographing them. I'm very conscious about it. For example, in one of my photography projects, I did staging using actors and volunteers and not the real subjects, because it could be very dangerous for them to come out. It's politically, legally very dangerous for them to come, to be in front of the camera. So I have to find solutions, creative solutions to figure it out. And the themes and one particular theme that I'm very much interested in, it's part of my long-term project. Visibility in Pakistan is something that I'm not looking for at all. So I get worried when people from Pakistan look at these projects, because I'm like, who's gonna see that? Like, will it be a problem for me? Can it be a problem, become a problem for someone who's been acting or who are in my photographs? So for me, distribution locally is not something that I'm looking for at all. So for me, a small audience, small, safe spaces are something that I'm constantly looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely become more.
Yeah, we lost your voice for
Sorry.
a second. So can you just start from the beginning? Yeah, now we can hear you.
I think that my gaze or practice as a documentarian has changed and evolved and become more politicized over the years as I grow as a human being and as I interact with the industry and just understand the work more. I think intention sharing and being very honest with yourself and with your collaborators in front of the camera about what the intentions of the work are is important, because that's a way to also check yourself always. And I think it's, for me, when I look at Showgirls, there is a very big difference between the world that we filmed and the world that I occupy. But the power relationships during the film were not skewed in our favor, because we were in spaces that we could be ejected from at any second at gunpoint, and so very much the women were in charge of their narrative. And of course, when you come to the edit table, then the power shifts to the filmmaker, because you can construct the narrative in any way. And that what has been a struggle for me and for Saad, the director of the film, how to navigate that. And over the years, as we struggled with the industry's gaze on our film and our story and the characters and our own gaze on them, I think bringing in the women's social media and allowing that to become a medium, a very strong medium in the film, was our way to ensure that as much as we can, that voice is pushing the narrative. And then for my new film, The Stained Dawn, which follows the Aurat March organizers in Karachi, I was like, going into it, I was like, oh, this is such a different power dynamic because they're all my friends and all of that. But I found myself getting intimidated by the amount of trust I had, because I was, one of them. But again, it was the intention of like, why am I making this film, that would make me put the camera down in some instances, because this is not the intention of the film, right? And this is harmful. This is a private space where I am here as a family member almost. And so instead of waiting for somebody else to give you the green light in the previous instance and in this instance, I had to self-check a lot more, surprisingly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really sorry about the internet and everything, everyone. Thank you for. I just want to follow up with what Anam and Nida have said and talk a bit about, when do you make that choice that you can't or you shouldn't maybe try to represent or work with another community? Because one of the big critiques with Girls at Dhaba that we got with our feminist collective was that, it doesn't include working class women. And if that's true, that was very much a limitation of the project and the scope. We were limited to urban centers and very much to middle upper class women and non-binary folks and femmes. But what was important there was to recognize that because so much of our work was about lived experience and actual our connections and our circles. So at what point would we be tokenizing if we suddenly expanded and said, okay, how do you go about that? Do you go into a neighborhood and say, unless you're meaningfully doing that work on a daily level? And I don't even think of that as just organizing spaces. I think that is one very important space, but the other space is your everyday relationship, right? So if my relationship with the domestic help in my house is, it has this power dynamic because of whatever reasons, then with what face am I like putting photos on Instagram saying, oh, here's a girl that have a meet up with working class, you know? So for me, and with the kind of work that I've done so far, you know, Anam and Nida are doing documentary and non-fiction like that, but my work is fiction or personal. So that's something that comes up a lot is I'm writing from lived experiences. So I have to be careful also not to tokenize in an attempt to be inclusive or be that perfect feminist, you know, to recognize our limitations.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I'm just also thinking like this also brings up this very important idea and which in a lot of times can be an obstacle but also sometimes becomes important. And here I'm thinking of, you know, and I think it comes up in all of your practices in various ways, and that is the idea of gendered excess. And you know, like Anam, in certain parts of the film, like Showgirls of Pakistan, it becomes a bit tangible also, and where like and Sadia, you're mentioning girls at dhabas, and you have been actually challenging that entire idea of gendered access to the city and the public spaces of leisure in a way. And Nida, it has been key to some of your work as well. Because otherwise maybe that work might not have been possible like how I like it. So I'm just thinking like how do you perceive and navigate you know, this space and how do you access through and access it or through it, if you can speak about that.
In my case, I'm only interested in stories that affect me directly or indirectly. All my subjects are people who I know personally or who I know through friends of friends. So for me, that this is how I work. So access has never been a problem to because they know my intention. A lot of subjects are very close to me. So there's a lot of sometimes collaboration, sometimes a lot of exchange that is happening. So that's how I work on stories in my case. So
Right.
access has never been a problem for me.
Right.
Yeah.
But just to add to that, like what I meant was like, for example, this film that I mentioned, it is a very specific, like female safe or female non-binary safe space that has been created, which could only perhaps have been, you know, intervened by a woman per se in this instance, for example. So in that way I meant like, you know, gendered excess. But I guess that's also a lot to do with the kind of content and where you're working on it with it. Yeah.
Yeah, you always have to have this strategy how to keep this place safe, like keep a secret. Like, you know, even the process of making that, like, you know, the process to create that space is another story. Like, you know, how like who interferes, like who are they hiding from, like, you know, when they are with me interviewing, like, you know, what are my limitations, who I, like, you know, so there is this lot of gender intervention there. Yeah, because I'm not comfortable sharing this film with a lot of male members of my family, like, you know, and same goes for them also.
Right.
So yes, there are these interventions, and that's that's
Great.
I think this is making me think about your last question as well, and I think that if I look at my work, it's all interested in performance to a degree, you know, from circus to dance halls to even activism. It's all in the realm of performance, and so is gender, and so is my gender and how I perform it when I am somewhere with a camera, and I feel like everywhere I go, I have to perform my gender and my class, or dance around it in a way in order to get what I want. you know, if I'm interviewing a government official, there's a different way I play things. I remember when I was following Afreen backstage, I was, you know, I could go because I was a woman. But the way I was dressed, the security guard was like, "Hey, you can't go in there." And Afreen, who thinks everybody's an idiot and is like so provincial, was like, "You idiots! Like she's a girl, you know." So, matlab, you know, so my need to sort of disappear myself a little bit when I'm in the field to be taken seriously as somebody who's working kind of conflicted with me needing to perform my femininity in order to access the space, which was funny. And then in another incident, I was in Multan, which was where Saad was filming a lot because the women there were more managed by male managers, and so my presence would make them uncomfortable, or they wouldn't speak freely about the way they conduct their business as they would with Saad, who was also performing his gender in class in a way when he was filming with them. And there was an incident when I went to film towards the end of our shoot where we were, me and some team I had with me were surrounded by pimps and managers, and it was a very potentially violent situation for us. And I remember telling my male team to leave because, you know, your guys will beat you up, but I'm a girl, they won't touch me. Just so stupid, not understanding like where I was and what actually could happen to me. So I think that one needs to be, I mean, you come into situations where your privilege maybe, or the way you've lived your life would obscure you from the realities of what the world is. And I think I was trained, or I grew up as in a way where I thought I had access to places because I was an upper class woman, and you know, and like coming into that, like they're not gonna touch me, and I was sorely mistaken. So there's a lot to learn, I think, about our preconceived notions and how we navigate the world.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the city in this regard of access, and I do think I think as code switch, my body, my performance, to use Anam's language, my access to the city also shifts, and that's not just about accessing the city for stories in terms of my work or my journalism. I mean, just accessing the city spiritually as a relationship that you have with a space you live in, and so it's interesting. You know, my body, I have body privilege also because I'm tiny. If I'm tiny and I dress up in more mass clothing and go out like that, then no one will look twice at me until they talk to me and they'll realize, you know, I'm not a dude, and then their reaction will shift. And then class plays a big role also. I do find that the kinds of questions or the kinds of harassment I incur, or the kinds of interruptions, use another word, in the city, they change depending on how I'm perceived. So if I'm perceived as working class or not upper class, which I am upper class, right? If I'm perceived as not that, then it's a very different degree of whether it's questioning or confusion or some kind of vitriol. But what I've been thinking about a lot in terms of access these days is, you know, to think of this is borrowing from Bart. He talks about private life or private space, whether it's in public or private, wherever it is, private life as being that zone of space where you are not an object. And I think that is something, it's very difficult if you're perceived to be a femme or an you are an object, right? So what are those where you stop being an object, whether you're working as a journalist or, you know, you're behind a camera? I think those spaces are rare, and I've been thinking about accessing those spaces, like even creatively.
The fact that you cannot be on your own in public places in Pakistan is also gender intervention. Like, you know, you just, someone has to be with you, especially if you're shooting late night. So it's constant. So I agree with what she's saying, that it's always there in shape. Sometimes just harassment, sometimes just the fear that you have in your mind. So that's also part of the reality.
And that really brings me to this idea that I want to pick up on, is that you know, where a show of resistance or subversiveness by a woman is often interpreted as empowerment. And I'm just thinking, like, you know, like, especially like, it's something that Anam, you also raised, because some of the reviews about the film were, oh, these women are so empowered. And, you know, like, and I'm just thinking about, again, this idea of the distinction between empowerment, being empowered, and being assertive. And, you know, like why do you think that the latter is, you know, interpreted as the former? Like, how is assertiveness misinterpreted as being empowered?
Empowerment is for good girls. Assertiveness is for bad girls, right? So if when you're kind of using good girl terminology for people, for women you actually don't believe to be good girls, or who have no interest in being good girls, that's sort of neutralizing them a little bit, which is why I don't like that word. I think the women who have been in any of the work that I've done, whether it's Ladies Only, you know, whether it's Sadia in front of the camera for me, or Afreen or Rima or the Women of the Earth March, they're all not interested in receiving anything. They're there to take. They're not interested in respectability politics, or playing into that, or staying within that bubble to articulate their desires, or the world that they imagine for themselves and are living, and are fighting for, within whatever choices the world avails to them. And that's always obviously not the same. So something other than empowerment, please. Which again is that NGO speak that's so violent towards us eventually.
It's also that, like, what is the scale of, like, so you weren't empowered before, and now at this point, now you're empowered, right? So what are we saying about what does empowerment look like? And we mentioned visibility before, but this idea of you visibilize certain things as empowered. But I don't even know if a lot of the stuff I do is like, I don't set out, you know, in my daily life to think, oh, today I want to empower myself and make these choices in the city. It's just daily survival, right? We're doing the best we can to improve our own individual conditions, whether in our workplaces or home spaces, in private spaces. So I like that we're refusing to adhere to these terms, and like, I think there's a new language emerging that we're all sort of getting to play a role in, and that's really exciting for me. While at the same time we're saying, okay, let's not use these words, but what that means is we're in this space where we're thinking, okay, so then what words do we use, right? And I think that's just such a big difference from when I first started off with all of this. So it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, for me also, I think that our stories of empowerment shouldn't be something great, like, you know, something like just living your life can also be empowering. It's very subjective where you're living, what your circumstances are. We don't necessarily need to do something really big, or like, you know, not all women have to come up and dance on stage in front of men to be empowered, like, you know. Not all, like, you know, so it's very subjective. Who's watching it, what kind of life one has lived. So something small as living your own life is as empowering as, like, you know, anything else. So so I feel it's subjective.
I'm just going to, sorry. I'm going to pick up on this one idea that, like, something that you spoke about in the beginning, Sadia, and that's about creating new narratives. And then I'm just thinking about this idea of documenting, creating new material, especially for absent or missing narratives, and you know, like it's like this conscious exercise of creating an archive of sorts, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And I'm just thinking, can you speak about the idea of creating legitimacy through documentation, and also like, if the archive is intentional, then how do you imagine the life of it? And if it can, you know, is it endangered by erasure and forgetfulness like other archives are? Or could it be different? Or if it's even that, or we need to think about it differently perhaps?
Oh my God, these are big questions. But you mean archiving generally, right? Whatever ways we are,
What I mean to say is like
or do you
when...
mean a specific project?
Yeah, no, like for example, like everything that you write, like even if it's your own experiences,
Right.
what you make, like when you document even your own experiences, or you're documenting someone else's
Oh,
story, in that way, like it is material being created, which is then out there in the world somewhere, right? And it is something
yeah.
that you want, you know, that is your voice and your opinion about something that perhaps does not exist, or is in response to something that does.
I understand the question. Okay. Yeah, this is a really tough one. I've been thinking a lot about it, especially, you know, in the social media age where even if you delete something, right, we live it, it's all there in the cloud. So sometimes I don't know if you all feel like this, but there are days where I wake up and I feel like everything because it just feels so much and wrong, and like, you know, and then there's this tide of social media just going on, and you feel like you need to participate also sometimes. Um, what helped me think about this is because I work in multiple genres. I work in fiction and nonfiction, and I often wonder at the distinction between the two. And I think like, what is the use of categorizing something as documentary or as nonfiction when you could very well publish the same thing and say, oh, it's fiction, right? But when you're saying something is life or nonfiction, you're saying it is a document of life. It is somehow some kind of truth, and I don't see truth as like a fixed, not that kind of thing we're taught in journalism school, but still something true story. And so I see our role in archiving, you know, whether it's through Girls at Habas or through I overpost on my Instagram a lot. So whether it's through that, like sort of oversharing my life, or Girls at Habas, or the kind of work Anam and Nida are doing, right? I see our job as archivists to have a stake in that truth telling, because that tide of imagination and reimagination, it's going on whether we participate in it or not. And so something is going to be discerned of our life as fact whether we choose it or not. And so for me, a lot of times, you know, inserting myself actively and naming something as archiving is to say, you know, I have this tide of truth telling, and I will have my piece in it. But that's not to say that it's outside of systems of surveillance or even outside of systems of performativity. I think those are still limitations we're learning to work with. But I find it really necessary and political. But I also see one of the biggest ways of archiving that of late is like, you know, WhatsApp conversations with friends and the journal. So spaces like letter writing, which WhatsApp, sometimes you're writing long messages to friends, right? But I find I'm thinking of the site of writing letters and journaling because it's a private space, right? It's not for the world. It's anti-capitalist in a way. No one's going to see it. I'm not going to publish those letters or those texts I wrote to Anam, but I am being my full self there. And somewhere it's being stored on some cloud. So that is also an archive. And for me, I'm thinking about the power of those archives, because you mentioned erasure also. And these are just thoughts from my head. I'm curious what Anam does think about this.
I'm going to comment on the legitimacy of archives. So my question is that who are the ones who are making archives in Pakistan? They are from a privileged background. How legitimate it is? It's not. I would never trust someone who's writing, like, who's from a privileged background, writing something about from marginalized communities. Like, it's not. We need to find ways, even in archive making, to shift this power dynamics. So I feel that tools of collaboration is something that's very important that we need to include in our processes, so that we can trust our archives more. And a lot of filmmakers, a lot of writers, researchers from Pakistan, they are the ones who have lived abroad, educated abroad. So there's already this power dynamics. So I think tools of collaboration is something that we need to put in our work, through our films, through our photography projects, through our researches, whatever we do, so that that shift, we balance that shift.
And like, I meant more in the sense of, because when you document something that is especially which is not there, or something which is negated, for example, then it's almost like creating a validation that no, it does, like whether you like it or not. So in that way, like, I was like thinking about that, like that, creating a legitimacy through documentation.
Yes, but we cannot see this as an individual product. What are the politics of that person who's making it, where it's coming from, who's funding it, where it goes? So that's also something that's very important that we need to do. Just documentation is not enough anymore. I know it's. I mean, if, as an evidence, as a document of history, it's important that at least there is something. But it's not enough anymore. That's what I feel.
I wanted to say, I don't know if I agree with that, but also because, I mean, I don't work so much collaboratively. I do so much work solo, and one of the video essay that I was talking about is a kind of archive. It's an archive of my walks. So it's footage from walks that I, an individual, have taken, mostly in Karachi and then some in other places. So it's literal walks and it's dreamscapes, but it is an archive of my feet. And in a city where, I try to walk as often as I can, but I still don't, like, this city is still, Karachi still doesn't feel like the way a city should feel, right? It's still like, I have to think, okay, what am I wearing? This, even when I'm out, something will happen, or maybe I'll be on edge or something if I'm alone. So an archive like that, it is an individual archive, but for me, it has a lot of power. Because I think when we make art, it also goes beyond the individual, right? It's not just me then taking that walk. It's not just Karachi. So many cities are implied, and I don't see it as a literal walk in Karachi. I see it as the raw material was my walks in Karachi, but it's a meditation on walking as a femme body in a city where femme bodies are maybe not normally found, walking in that way, in that leisurely way. So I hold on a little bit to the power of individual archives. And I don't think anything is really, really individual in that way. So I want to complicate that a bit. I don't think it's like none of my understanding of feminism or walking or these walks would exist without all the women in my life, all the feminists in my life, right? So my journey to walking and with walking is a collaborative archive that may not be visible, but it is implied in the essay.
I agree with Nida's question about archives as institutional projects, for sure, and concerns that I have as a Pakistani filmmaker are, our historical cultural iconography is not available to us. So if the PTV archives are not available to us, unless you are super elite and you have connections and you can get into those archives and pull what you want, and they are very intentionally not available to us and intentionally left. I mean, I don't know how intentional that is. That's just, how terribly managed PTV is. But, the truths that are in that history, which is now being encapsulated into the single national curriculum, archive suddenly becomes very, very important, right? Archiving what used to be studied in school. So when you're living under that extremity of erasure of your culture, I think the power dynamics, as Nida said, and the hierarchies become very important because they dictate what will continue to be erased. Because that is just the cultural makeup, and it trickles down. And another way to like subvert it is an example. My friend is a Thai documentarian, and he's working on a film where, and I'm going to forget the cultural specificities, but a young man was killed on a military checkpoint, and the surveillance footage was disappeared by the military. And so his brother, who survives him, and some friends set out to make to replicate the missing surveillance footage. And my friend, the filmmaker, is filming that, film within a film. And so that so then archiving in that very or filming or documentation is a way of taking back your power as the person who creates the truth, and the state or whoever is at the top in the power dynamic, it no longer is the sole keeper of truth. And so in any way that we work where we can shift the truth telling to our favor is good trouble.
I have a lot more questions, but I am going to give some space to the audience and everyone who's watching us online. If they have any questions, then we can open up for the Q&A.
So I don't think there are any questions online yet.
Okay.
Just looking in the audience if there's any question here. No?
Yeah.
Wait, Amna?
Earlier, Nida was mentioning that her work is not for a Pakistani audience, and obviously we all know why. But I wonder, as somebody who is also struggling with wondering where the relationship between the piece of work that you produce, whether it's writing or archiving for the self or for political activism, I mean, what is that relationship, the nuanced relationship for all of you? I mean, Nida answered that, but I'm curious to know with Anam and Sadia what they feel about how their work is perceived. Like, what does that play a role in the process of your work? Or, I mean, we do say we work with raw material, but it's also about how it's viewed, as this talk is called Ways of Seeing. So I'm just curious.
So for me, it's definitely, again, shifted, and my any desire that I had to please the documentary industry was met with such violence that it politicized me. And so I'm very lucky that my work has had a chance to be available globally. Showgirls of Pakistan is available on YouTube. If you look at the comments, most of them are Pakistani and Indians, which means that it becomes a really interesting sort of way to just reading the comments is very interesting, because it's not the reactions one would hope for or expect oftentimes. And then with my new film as well, it's in a weird position where it was made for a Pakistani audience, was made to travel in universities and have like a bunch of community screenings, but I'm no longer able to show it in Pakistan for the time being for security reasons. And I'm really actually disgusted, especially now, again, what I said about the way our resistances are interpreted by the Western gaze. So we're at a festival next month, and I'm happy about it because it's good for me and my career to open at a prestigious festival. But at the same time, I'm like, I would rather us watch and celebrate our resistance, because I know that it will be seen in a different way from what I see, you know. It's the same content, but it's seen differently.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. My work isn't, I mean, I don't show stuff on a global stage. Mostly to Pakistani urban audiences. And I write, and now I'm getting into film. But the way my trajectory has gone, the reader or the audience is playing less and less of a role in my decision of what the work itself. And maybe that's because I started off with a lot of the themes I cover are like cities, queerness, gender, sexuality. So because of girls at Dhabas and all of that, naturally seeped over, and there was a lot of factoring in of who I was writing for, and particularly like writing for young feminists in the city in Pakistan. But I wrote One Piece under an alias at that time, so I had to publish it under a different name, which I took Anam's name and some friend's name and I jumbled up and I used that. But the reason was that my family would not be okay with it. I was revealing too much about my life, etc., etc. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up because I think that plays a role sometimes when we do put work out. But since now I don't publish anonymously anymore, but also I shift now. But I find that
Sadia, could you maybe repeat that thought
it seems to
because your voice got broke up? I think
yeah.
we have.
Can you
Yeah.
hear me now?
Yeah. Now we have you back.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was saying that even though the reader is not something I think of actively, like, oh, who is my reader? Who am I making this work for? I think that the reader or the audience has shaped us just by circumstances of me having lived in Pakistan and experienced my work. It to a certain interest. So I find that if I trust that those influences are there, and if I can just trust them and not worry too much about them, and focus more on, like I was talking earlier about what Hajra said about nonlinear narratives, right? I'm more interested these days about that playground space of how do we break apart questions of craft. And I trust that the subjects are there because they're in my body, they're in my politics, and they're in the people around me who kind of keep recentering us, right? Our communities.
Do we?
I don't think we have any further questions.
Okay.
So, Hajra, if you want to say a last word and wrap it up.
Okay.
Also, maybe what I would have to say, apart from thank you, is that we have you here tomorrow at 6:15. So maybe you can also say a word on the upcoming talk with Bani Abidi tomorrow. But thank you very much from our side.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, before I wrap up, I just want to announce something very exciting, and that is that Anam's debut feature film as a director, the Disdain Dawn that she also mentioned just now, is set to launch next month. It's premiering at the Sheffield Fest Doc. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And yeah, I just want to thank all of you so much for a really thought-provoking conversation and so many very important and critical points to think about and to work with as practitioners, also as viewers when looking at content, consuming it. And also just to, how do we shape experiences? Like, I think there's like just this consciousness of as not just as makers, but also as viewers, like how do we shape understandings, perceptions, and experiences. So thank you so much for your time. And I really hope that we have a chance to continue this conversation sometime soon again. Thanks again,
Thank you,
Benny and
Hajra.
Amna. And
Lynn.
I also, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
so much, Nida.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.